All right, today's lesson is going to be about annotation. Annotation is a big word, just basically meaning how to take notes while reading. So, what is annotation and close reading? Well, annotation is a note added to a text, a book, drawing, or etc., used as a comment or explanation. So, if I wanted to annotate this sentence, I might underline something. Maybe I will write something over on the side to explain why I underlined that. That's you making a note about something that you are reading. It's also the act of adding comments to something, and this is a definition found in the dictionary, just a general idea of what annotation means. Here is an example. Even though you may not be able to read what the words say, you can see that there are some things circled, there are some things underlined, there's words off to the side. There's even words and lines right by each other. This basically is just an example, one easy example of what annotation could look like. Yours may look like this if you prefer highlighters like I do. Maybe it's full of color. That's totally okay. There are 4 types of connections you can make when annotating a text. So you may be wondering, well, what do I put in the side? What do I put in the column? I see words there, but what am I supposed to write? Well, I taught you about those signposts for nonfiction. So the quoted words, we talked about contrast and contradiction, word gaps, things like that. You could be writing those things in the margins, or you can make a connection. So the first one is going to be a text to self. Very straightforward. You are making a connection to whatever you're reading. So describe the ways that you relate to the reading. Maybe it's something that you've experienced that's similar. What does the value hold for you? This is probably the easiest one to do because you're just making that deeper personal connection. So let's say I'm reading a book about like the Diary of Anne Frank. I actually went and visited the actual house that Anne Frank was in during that time in Germany. And I could make a connection to like how she must have felt, because when I went through that house, I could just feel like chills going through my body and the tight spaces where they had to hide. So that's my text to self connection. So you could just write that off to the side. You can write down text to self if you wanted to. Another type is text to itself. And what this means is you're going to describe the major features of the writing style. So think about like how to analyze the text to what, like the text structure and what is trying to tell you about that certain text. So like compare and contrast, description, things like that. What is the purpose of that? Another one is text to another text. So maybe you're making a connection between a novel that you read this year and maybe one that you read last year, one that you read on your own. Totally cool. I love when students do this. Or even in class, sometimes I'll say something and a student will raise their hand. They'll be like, oh my gosh, that reminds me of when I read this or when they did this somewhere. Those are great text to text connections, or if you connect to yourself, a text to self connection. It doesn't have to be just English class to English class. Maybe you did something in science class this week that reminded you of something that we're learning right now in ELA. That's totally good too. The last one is text to world. This is the one I want you to kind of think outside the box and challenge yourself a little bit more to make that connection. Text to world is going to be explaining what you see between what's important of that essay, the article, the book, and then the world around you. So how does it affect what you're doing in your day-to-day life? That is kind of like a more advanced thing to be able to do. So I'm going to try and push you to do this near the end of the school year. So we talked about these 5 signposts. So the signposts and annotation go hand in hand. More so this quarter, we're going to annotate with nonfiction, which is why I just taught you the nonfiction signposts. Remember, there's number and stats. There's quoted words, so you're using a quote from somebody else. Word gaps are those big words or words you may not know. Contrast, contradiction, you're contradicting something that you know versus maybe what the author is saying. And then that extreme language is words like always or never that the author is using. Now here is a great example of what not to do. Every year I tell students, do not do this, and every year students do it. When you have an article or a piece of paper that has words on it, and I ask you to annotate it. I do not want to see the entire thing highlighted. Okay, you're picking out those key phrases, those keywords, and then explaining it or making your connection in the side margin. You do not want to highlight every single paragraph, every single sentence. I know you're going to want to because you're like, oh, well, this is important and this is important, but don't do it. Okay, so here's another example. Now, when I say make an annotation, I'm going to have you write down a symbol and then going to have you write down an explanation with it. So they go hand in hand, a symbol with an explanation, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But what I don't want to see is LOL. Okay, you're laughing out loud, but like, why? Tell me what's funny about it. What's going on? Cool. Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's okay, but I want you to tell me what you didn't know. I didn't know pigs could fly. I didn't know blank. Don't just say that, because me as a teacher, as a reader, I don't know what the word that means. If you write down funny, once again, explain why is it funny. Weird, well, what's weird about it? Explain yourself. Boring, okay, why is it boring? And don't just circle random words. I know that's tempting to do. Don't just circle them. Don't just underline them. If you have a question mark next to something, explain what you're confused on. Don't just put a question mark by it, because just like in class, if you raise your hand, you're like, I don't get it. I'm going to ask you, what don't you get? Or if you're a remote learner, you email me, this isn't working. Okay, what isn't working? Because I need you to give me a little bit more information and detail so that I can best help you. So reasons why we should annotate close readings. Well, it helps with comprehension. For me and for most of the world, which is why I'm teaching you, when you are annotating and writing and highlighting as you read, it helps you comprehend, understand what you're reading better. If you give me a history book or a science book right now and I just read it and you tell me to tell you what I read, I struggle with that. Now, if I'm taking notes throughout it and I'm underlining and I'm making connections, if you ask me, I'm going to probably remember it. In 2 days, I'll probably be able to remember it. You want to note important places in the text. So once again, if say we read like an article on the NBA, if I ask you a specific question and you don't know the answer, you do not want to reread that entire article, do you? No. But if you're making annotations, maybe the question had something to do with a player. And somewhere in your article, you can find that player's name because you highlighted it. Well, you can just flip through really quickly, find your annotation, and then you can be able to pick up the answer a lot quicker than having to reread the whole article again. So just like I just said, it makes it easier to go back and find key phrases or quotations for the paper for later on. And once again, it helps you with that retention. So if I asked you in like 2-3 days, a summary of the article, I bet you'd be better able to remember it as opposed to just reading it and not writing anything. Before reading is super important. Always preview your text before reading it. You want to notice how long it is. Look at the title, look at the structure. Are there lots of paragraphs? Are there pictures? Are there headings? Like, what are you looking for? I do this because number one, it tells me how long the article is I'm going to be reading. I like to know what I'm getting myself into. I also want to see if there's any charts. So if there are statistics, if there are images, things like that, that helps me know what I'm looking for when I'm reading. And I also number the paragraphs because if I'm like, hey, in paragraph 5, it stated this. Instead of you going through and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just look for the number 5 and you're good to go. Especially if there's like 30, 40, 50 paragraphs, it would take you a long time to count those up. So if you're at home watching this, I want you to try and take notes somewhere on this next slide or screenshot it. This next slide is going to be important. So before you read, you preview your paper, your article, your essay. While reading, you want to do these types of annotations. Underline the topic, sentence, and main idea. So if something is super important, the big takeaway that you want to remember from the article, underline it. Underline it, underline it, underline it. And then maybe explain on the margin why you underlined that. You maybe want to circle words that you don't know or powerful words. So this could be like the word gap. You could circle it, put a WG by it, and write down word gap. Maybe you looked up the definition, then you can write the definition by it. You draw a star next to something that's important. So Underlining is like the main idea of the topics. Stars are those important details that go underneath the main idea. So like if my main idea is how to make pizza, I might star important details like knead the dough, pour the sauce on the bread, on the dough, etc. Obvious one is question mark. If you don't know what something is, put a question mark by it. And then next to it, write down what you're confused on. The infinity symbol is probably one you're not going to remember very well, but it's a connection that you are making with the text. So think about like half a circle pointing at you, half a circle pointing at the text. You're making a text connection of some sort. Text to text, text to self, text to world, text to another text. Just put the infinity symbol, the little 8, to the side, and then explain which connection that you are having. Mark interesting or surprising things as an exclamation point. Once again, I feel like it's pretty straightforward. If it's exciting, exclamation point. Tell me why it's exciting. So this is an example I want to explain with you and then show you how to annotate. It's called The History of Chocolate. When you think of chocolate, you probably imagine your favorite candy bar. So like right now, I'm thinking about my favorite candy bar. But when chocolate was first discovered over 4,000 years ago, it was actually consumed as a bitter-tasting drink mixed with honey, vanilla, and chili peppers. Chocolate is made from a bean called cocoa, which is grown on trees that are native to Central and South America. After the beans are picked, they are allowed to ferment and dry for several weeks before being made into chocolate. In the 14th century, the Aztec and Mayan people living in Mexico and Central America believed that chocolate had mystical properties. They used chocolate as sacred ceremonies and reserved chocolate for rulers and priests. In fact, chocolate was so desirable that cocoa beans were used as currency, which means money. For example, in 1545, one cocoa bean could buy a large tomato, and 100 cocoa beans could be traded in for a whole turkey. Holy cow. So on these next slides, I'm going to show you how I annotated when I first read this. So you shouldn't just read that through and then not have anything. You want to stop and annotate. So here's my first paragraph. So the first sentence said, when you think of chocolate, you probably imagine your favorite candy bar. So in my mind, like I said, I'm making a connection. I am thinking about my favorite candy bar, and mine is actually Reese's Pieces. Reese's Pieces. So then I continue on, and the part that says bitter tasting drink mixed with honey, vanilla, and chili peppers, I underline that because it's an important main idea, and I put exclamation points by it because I'm like, what? I had no idea chocolate had chili peppers in it. That sounds gross to me. Following along a little more, I highlighted the word cocoa because I feel like that was an important word that kind of stood out, maybe the vocab word for chocolate. And then I also underlined as a main idea, it was grown on trees that are native to Central and South America. I don't know if you know this, but Central and South America are the producers of chocolate, the main beans that we have today. So going on to our second paragraph, once again, we have Mexico and Central America, where this all happened with these ceremonies. The chocolate was reserved for rulers and priests. So I put a star by that and an exclamation point because I didn't realize people that were like high up were the only ones who ate chocolate. I mean, I eat chocolate every day if I wanted to. I take it for granted, but now back in the 14th century, it was only reserved for those rulers and the priests and the people of high authority. So moving on a little bit farther down, cocoa beans were used as currency. Like you could literally use chocolate as money. So if I wanted to go to the store, I could be like, hey, I'll buy that shirt. Sure, 20 cocoa beans. Like that blows my mind. You can use chocolate as money. Okay, so I find this interesting. It makes me think of my childhood. When we didn't have money, we exchanged items instead. So I think about like lunch. If my friend had a Lunchable and I really wanted the nachos Lunchable or pizza, those are good. We would be like, hey, I'll trade you my pudding cup for your Lunchable. I'll trade you my Oreos for your Lunchable. Kind of the same thing because we obviously didn't have money. So I want you to think right now, do you have any questions about how to annotate a nonfiction piece of work? If you do, please email me. Otherwise, think about not highlighting everything, but using symbols and then explanation. So I want you to get in the habit of putting a symbol. Okay, so every time you put a symbol, you must then have an explanation directly with it. So I know your thought process. And we will review this again with actual articles later on this week and next week.